who is near the church is often far from God. A Marvel fanfiction written on AO3 by Ingi. The link for this fanfiction will be in the description box below, so I encourage you all to go check it out. Okay, so let me get this straight, Tony said, while fiddling on the inside of some machine or other. Our friend in red spandex has found his true calling? And is that all you've gotten from this? Peter replied, exasperated. It had been a long afternoon. Wade had been gone for almost 2 weeks and was refusing to tell Peter just where the heck he was going and why, although Peter wasn't entirely certain he wanted to know either. And it wasn't that he couldn't survive without Wade, he'd done so most of his life. So, in short, Peter was tired. Very tired. And then he'd gone to look for Tony in his lab to hang out, just to take a peek at the adventures he'd been absorbed in lately, and possibly, just complain a little. Peter found himself telling Tony more than he'd meant to, and he'd had to spend the last 15 minutes reminding Tony of who Deadpool even was. Brackets, the guy with the giant katanas, Tony, ring a bell? He whistles the overture of One Tiny Soldier every time you enter the room, unbracket. And he wouldn't be able to tell if Tony had been too focused on his work to pay attention to him, or if he'd been messing with him, or sincerely managed to forget Wade somehow. But the latter wasn't likely. Wade always left an impression. In fact, he made so much of an impression that some old grandmas, even after they'd rescued months ago, started walking faster and crossing themselves if they ever passed by him, and Peter was almost certain they had an advanced case of Alzheimer's. No offense, but Tony seemed to think it through and shrugged. Never mind, full offense, but I don't see why I should care about Wade's sudden religious call. Then he immediately contradicted himself by asking, and how did that happen, anyway? There was a church involved, Peter sighed. I'd rather not talk about it. A church? Tony grinned. How bizarre. It's Wade, Peter reminded him. Trust me, it was bizarre. A good point. Tony scowled at the mess in front of him and then looked at Peter, briefly. Hold that cable there for a second, the purple one. Peter regarded it with inevitable distrust, but pressed the cable down with his finger anyway. Bizarre is too small of a word. And after a second, he added, and mortified despite himself, the sentence, "Forgive me, Father Wilson, for I have sinned," may have been uttered. Tony laughed so hard that Jarvis actually piped in to make sure he wasn't dying. Yeah, thanks for that, buddy. Peter wisely chose to ignore that. Tony, he's bought a clerical collar, he hissed, and a shirt. He said they were 2 signs of his priestly consultation to the Lord, and then rattled off another 22 reasons of why he was trying to get me to talk him out of wearing them as an insult to God, the Holy Church, and his holy katanas, which he personally kissed and blessed by the pontiff himself. Tony was still snickering, but he stopped long enough to ask, our friendly killer neighbor Wilson, wearing actual clothes? Kid, you better take a picture or you'll be in life target duty for Clint until you're 80. Don't worry, Peter replied, tiredly. Wade took about 100 selfies. Tony immediately dropped everything in his hands and went to fish for his phone, in his pocket. Tony rolled his eyes and waited until he opened his Instagram and was scrolling through Wade's most recent photos. Shit, Tony exclaimed. I've got to tag Natasha in this, grinning. Have you seen this? He's posting about the Bible in one hand and a margarita in the other. I didn't even know he had a Bible, or any tequila left. He added, growling. The bastard promised. He didn't. I'm pretty sure that's his fake Bible, Peter said, rubbing his temples. You know, the one where he stores his emergency flask of whiskey? Tony looked up at him and wiggled his eyebrows. Don't, Peter warned him, and Tony beamed. Who? Me? I'm not saying a word, kid. Do you hear me saying anything? No, 'cause I'm not. But I could. I so could. You know what? I'm gonna go buy some coffee. Peter sighed. At least £50? Oh, and don't forget the apple pie, Parker. Tony called after him, unfazed as Peter left the lab. Steve needs his fixing of an embarrassingly American food. Okay. Oh, and Peter? Peter closed his eyes very tightly and allowed himself a moment to regret what he was about to do beforehand, before he turned back to face Tony, who's wearing a kind of smile you don't want to have directed at you. Yes, sir? Remember to tell Wilson to get a priest certificate. If he gets ordained online before the end of the week, he can minister your own ceremony, Tony said, wiggling his eyebrows again. Peter didn't actually buy any coffee in the end. He was too busy searching if one could actually officiate their own wedding.